Imagine once being hailed as the king of British boxing, pulling up to red carpets in Ferraris, throwing somersaults into the ring, and collecting millions with every punch. That was the world of Prince Naseem Hamed, a fighter who turned the featherweight division into a stage show and made arrogance look like art. But fast forward to 2025, and the story takes a much darker tone. The man who once redefined showmanship is now a shadow, living a life far removed from the cameras he once craved. His fans ask the same haunting questions. What happened to Prince Naseem? Why did he vanish at the very peak of his powers? Is his luxurious lifestyle still what it used to be? Or is there a tragic truth behind his silence? Today, at 51 years old, Naseem Hamed is barely recognizable from the brash superstar who ruled the 90s. This is his story. His rise, his riches, his downfall, and the quiet battles he's been facing ever since. The prince who conquered the world, and the man who disappeared without a goodbye. Naseem Hamed's story begins far from the bright lights of Madison Square Garden. Born on February 12, 1974, in Sheffield, England, he was the son of Yemeni immigrants who worked long hours just to keep food on the table. He grew up in a crowded house with 9 siblings, where every pound mattered, and every day felt like survival. In Sheffield's Steel City streets, distractions were everywhere, and many boys were swallowed by them. But young Naseem had something different, a restless energy, a fire that even he couldn't quite explain. At 7 years old, he would stand in front of a mirror, mimicking Muhammad Ali, shadowboxing, dancing, declaring he'd be better than Sugar Ray Leonard. His family laughed, neighbors dismissed him, but inside, he believed every word. His life changed the day he walked into Brendan Ingles' famous Winco Bank gym. Brendan, an eccentric but brilliant trainer, saw immediately that the small boy with oversized gloves was special. Naseem wasn't just fast, he was untouchable. Brendan taught him rhythm, footwork, patience, and timing. He made him shadowbox to reggae music, shuffle to unorthodox beats, and fight with angles nobody expected. Don't just box, Brendan told him, perform. And that's exactly what Naz learned to do. But Brendan could never teach what Naseem already had in his blood. Power. Pure, freakish, God-given knockout power. By his teenage years, he was dropping grown men in sparring sessions, folding them with punches that came from impossible angles. Word spread quickly. This skinny Yemeni kid from Sheffield wasn't just good. He was frightening. In 1992, Naseem made his professional debut. On live television, with cameras watching closely, he walked into the ring not like a nervous rookie, but like a man who owned it. He smiled, he danced, and then he flattened his opponent in just 2 rounds. The crowd didn't know whether to laugh at his arrogance or applaud his brilliance. From that moment, Britain had a problem, and a phenomenon. Was Naseem Hamed a clown destined to flame out, or was he the savior of British boxing? He called himself the Prince, and whether you loved him or hated him, you couldn't look away. His confidence bordered on madness, his reflexes looked superhuman, and his punches ended fights before they even began. By the time he was 21, he wasn't just Sheffield's son anymore, he was Britain's most polarizing fighter. The stage was set. The Prince was ready to take over. By the mid-1990s, Prince Naseem Hamed was no longer just a prospect. He was a storm tearing through the featherweight division. Every fight became a spectacle, and every entrance was bigger than the last. In 1995, he traveled to hostile Cardiff to face Steve Robinson for the WBO featherweight belt. The Welsh crowd booed him mercilessly, mocking the cocky young challenger who strutted to the ring with his chin high and his smile wide. But when the bell rang, everything changed. Naseem danced circles around Robinson, taunted him with hands down by his waist, and struck with venomous counters. By the 8th round, Robinson was finished, and Prince Naz was crowned champion. Cardiff fell silent, and a star was born. What made Naseem different wasn't just his power, it was the way he carried himself. He didn't tiptoe into the spotlight. He owned it. His entrances became legendary, walking out on flying carpets, backflipping over the ropes, dancing in leopard print trunks while fireworks exploded. He blurred the line between boxing and theater, turning every fight into a global event. Purists hated it, calling him arrogant, disrespectful, a sideshow. But fans loved it, chanting his name before he even threw a punch. And the best part? He backed it all up. Opponents fell one by one, often unable to land a glove on him before being knocked senseless. He didn't just win fights, he humiliated rivals. Naseem's name was everywhere. He was plastered across tabloids, featured in commercials, adored by immigrant communities across Britain who saw him as proof that a kid from Sheffield with Arab blood and swagger could take over the world. By 1997, America came calling. HBO rolled out the red carpet, hungry for a new star who could electrify audiences. His U.S. debut against Kevin Kelly at Madison Square Garden became an instant classic. The fight was pure chaos, knockdowns on both sides, drama in every round. But in the 4th, Naseem landed his signature left hand, dropping Kelly for good. The Garden erupted. America had never seen anything like him. He was brash, flamboyant, fearless, and devastating. Overnight, Prince Naseem Hamed became a global superstar. Reporters compared him to Muhammad Ali for his showmanship, to Mike Tyson for his raw power, and yet he was unlike anyone else. He was something new, a fusion of fighter and performer. And with each victory, his legend grew. But behind the glitter and the glow, something else was happening. Fame was feeding his confidence, but it was also planting the seeds of a downfall that no one, not even the prince himself, could see coming. By the late 1990s, Prince Naseem Hamed wasn't just a boxer. He was a phenomenon, a one-man empire. Every fight was worth millions. Every entrance was bigger, louder, more outrageous than the last. He strutted into arenas wearing crowns, capes, and leopard skin shorts, often taking longer to make his way to the ring than to dismantle the man waiting inside it. He would boast, "I don't need luck, I've got Allah," then deliver a knockout that seemed to prove him right. Crowds were split down the middle. Half loved him, half despised him. But nobody could ignore him. He was boxing's ultimate showman, and he was living like royalty outside the ring too. Mansions, diamond-encrusted Rolexes, Ferraris and Lamborghinis lined his driveways. Tabloids followed him endlessly, and he leaned into it, bragging that he could knock out anyone at 50%. But behind the bravado, something important was slipping. His relationship with Brendan Ingle, the man who had built him from a boy into a star, had begun to fracture. Brendan's eccentric discipline, the reggae shadow boxing, the awkward defensive drills, had been the foundation of Naz's craft. But as the millions rolled in, Naz started seeing less need for discipline and more need for yes men. He stopped listening to Brendan, brushing off advice, and soon the partnership ended in an ugly split. Brendan accused him of selfishness and arrogance. Naz dismissed Brendan as jealous and outdated, but the truth was simple. Without Brendan's discipline, Naz's training camps became chaotic. Sessions shortened, sparring grew softer, his diet slipped, He bulked up unnaturally, losing the razor-sharp edge that once made him untouchable. Still, the prince kept winning. He flattened Boom Boom Johnson, unified the IBF and WBO belts, then demolished Wayne McCullough, Wilfredo Vasquez, and Paul Ingle. His left hand remained a thunderbolt, but whispers in boxing circles grew louder. His reflexes weren't as sharp. His timing was a beat off. He was struggling more to make weight. But Nas didn't care. He was still cashing checks, still selling out arenas, still performing like a rock star. To him, boxing wasn't about legacy anymore. It was about attention, about staying the center of the universe. And as his show grew larger, the cracks beneath the crown grew wider. Promoters whispered that he was becoming difficult. Commentators noticed his arrogance rising while his hunger seemed to fade. Rivals sensed weakness, but Nas couldn't see it. He was too busy basking in the glow of superstardom, too distracted by million-dollar cars and flashing diamonds on talk shows. In his mind, he was still untouchable. In reality, he was walking straight toward a reckoning. One fight, one night, one opponent who would tear down the entire illusion in front of the world. It was April 7th, 2001, Las Vegas, the MGM Grand, a night built to crown the prince as the king of world boxing. The hype was enormous. The money was massive. This was supposed to be Naseem Hamed's coronation on American soil. Across from him stood Marco Antonio Barrera, the Mexican legend with ice in his veins. For years, Barrera had been the boogeyman of the lower weight classes, relentless, technical, ruthless. But Nas didn't care. He arrived with his usual swagger, grinning, dancing, strutting to the ring as if defeat was impossible. He told reporters his power was too much for any man alive. To the outside world, this was just another show. But when the bell rang, it was different. From the first round, Barrera refused to play the prince's game. He didn't brawl, didn't rush, didn't get caught in chaos. He boxed smart, disciplined, surgical. Every time Hamed lunged forward with his wide, looping shots, Barrera slipped, stepped aside, and punished him with clean counters. By the third round, the smile was gone from Nas's face. By the sixth, his eyes betrayed something his fans had never seen before: confusion. The aura of invincibility that had carried him through so many nights was evaporating under the Mexican's precision. Barrera wasn't afraid, and that terrified Hamed. As the rounds dragged on, Nas became desperate, swinging wildly, searching for the one punch that could save him. But Barrera never gave him the chance. He dictated every exchange, turned every wild swing into another missed opportunity, another embarrassment. And in the 12th and final round, Barrera delivered the ultimate insult. He trapped Hamed in the corner, tied him up, and deliberately rammed his face into the turnbuckle pad. A humiliating punctuation mark on a masterclass. The bell rang, and everyone in the arena knew what they had just witnessed: the dismantling of a myth. The judges' scorecards read unanimous decision for Barrera, but the result was already written in the body language of both men. Barrera raised his hands with quiet satisfaction. Nas walked out with his head down, his crown shattered. That night wasn't just a loss. It was the collapse of an illusion. The prince, who had promised to retire undefeated, had been stripped bare. He didn't speak at the press conference. He didn't demand a rematch. He didn't vow revenge. Instead, he disappeared. Weeks passed, then months. Broadcasters begged him to return, promoters lined up offers, but the prince stayed silent. He wasn't just defeated in Las Vegas, he was broken. And while the world moved on, the man who once made entire arenas roar with his swagger and spectacle faded into the shadows, leaving fans to wonder if the Barrera fight had done more than beat him in the ring. Had it destroyed him forever? After Las Vegas, the boxing world waited for the inevitable announcement. A rematch with Barrera, a comeback fight, or at the very least a statement from the prince himself. But weeks turned to months, and silence became the answer. In 2002, after more than a year away, Naseem returned for what was billed as his comeback. The opponent was Manuel Calvo, a solid but unspectacular fighter. The night was supposed to remind fans of the fireworks, the knockouts, the arrogance that once made Naz unmissable. Instead, it became the funeral of his career. He walked to the ring heavier, slower, and without the electric spark that once lit up arenas. For 12 dull rounds, he jabbed, circled, and cruised without risk. There were no backflips, no taunts, no explosive knockouts, just a sluggish points victory that left the crowd restless and then openly booing. For the first time in his career, Prince Naseem Hamed was booed not by rivals' fans, but by his own. The magic was gone. And after that night, so was he. At just 28 years old, still undefeated outside of Barrera, still wealthy beyond measure, he vanished from the sport without a retirement speech, without a farewell fight, without closure. The once flamboyant showman slipped away quietly, his gloves hung up in silence. While others in his generation fought on into their late 30s and 40s, Naz retreated into a life of luxury and isolation. He still had millions in the bank, a net worth estimated at more than $38 million, enough to live like a king forever. But money without purpose quickly became a curse. Without training camps to keep him sharp, without cameras to fuel his ego, without rivals to chase, his body softened and his fire dimmed. Paparazzi photos over the years showed the transformation. The shredded featherweight phenom who once flew over ropes was replaced by a bloated figure almost unrecognizable, often speculated to have gained over 100 pounds. He became a ghost, haunting the sport he once ruled, refusing interviews, refusing commentary jobs, refusing even to train fighters. While other legends like Lennox Lewis or Bernard Hopkins stayed connected to the game, Naz shut the door completely. To many, it was baffling. He had been the brightest star of British boxing, a man whose knockouts filled highlight reels across the globe, and yet he walked away without explanation. For the fans, there was only frustration. For the prince, there was only silence. And in that silence, his myth began to erode. No documentaries, no farewell, no legacy tour, just absence. The boy who had once shadowboxed in his bedroom mirror, believing he'd surpass Ali, and Leonard had conquered the world, then left it without a goodbye. For a man who once believed he was untouchable, reality came crashing down not in the ring, but on the roads of South Yorkshire. In 2005, Prince Naseem Hamed was behind the wheel of his $325,000 Mercedes McLaren SLR, a machine as flashy and dangerous as the man himself. Reports say he was driving recklessly, weaving through traffic, overtaking cars on a blind bend at terrifying speed. In an instant, the illusion of invincibility shattered. His car collided head-on with a Volkswagen Golf driven by Anthony Bergen, a man with no connection to boxing, just an ordinary driver whose life would be forever changed. The impact was catastrophic. Bergen suffered multiple fractures, broken bones, and lifelong injuries. Witnesses described the wreckage as horrific, a twisted display of metal and arrogance meeting reality. Hamed himself crawled from the wreck, shaken but alive, spared the worst of the injuries, though his public image would never recover. The investigation revealed the brutal truth. He was speeding far beyond the limit, his actions reckless, his attitude cavalier. Worse still, he had been driving without valid insurance. For years, he had strutted into arenas claiming divine protection, that luck and destiny were on his side. But now, he was not the untouchable prince of British boxing. He was an ordinary man facing the full weight of the law. The verdict was damning. In 2006, Hamed was sentenced to 15 months in prison. The world gasped. The boy who once danced on flying carpets into packed arenas now shuffled into a cell. Though he only served 16 weeks before being released on electronic tag, the damage was permanent. Prison wasn't just a punishment, it was a humiliation. Tabloids tore him apart. Former fans called him reckless, arrogant, careless with lives that weren't his own. The crash stripped away what little shine remained on his legacy, leaving behind a man remembered less for his knockouts and more for his downfall. And even after prison, the shadow lingered. Hamed tried to retreat into his quiet life of wealth and isolation, but the world wouldn't forget. Every sighting, every photograph, every article reminded people not of his brilliance in the ring, but of the man who nearly killed someone through sheer recklessness. The shame followed him, and though he rarely spoke of it, you could see it in his eyes, in the few public appearances that came after. The prison walls had long opened, but the weight of that disgrace never left. As the years passed after his prison sentence, the silence around Prince Naseem Hamed grew heavier. Boxing, a sport that thrives on memory and myth, slowly began to forget him. Younger generations who once copied his dances in schoolyards no longer knew his name. His highlight reels still floated on YouTube, knockouts replayed with awe, but the man behind them was vanishing into obscurity. Unlike Lennox Lewis, Roy Jones Jr., or even Mike Tyson, who found ways to stay relevant through commentary, exhibitions, or mentoring, Nas chose exile. He turned down TV roles, declined offers to train fighters, refused to defend his legacy in interviews. For a man who once lived for attention, the silence was deafening. When he was inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame in 2015, fans hoped it would spark something, that the prince would seize the moment and remind the world who he was. Instead, his acceptance speech was brief, flat, and distant. There were no jokes, no backflips, no arrogance, just a tired man standing on stage, speaking in monotone as if the memories themselves weighed too much. To many, it was heartbreaking. The crowd wanted the showman. What they got was a ghost. In gyms across Britain, young fighters studied Floyd Mayweather, Manny Pacquiao, or even Amir Khan, but rarely Naseem. Trainers stopped teaching his unorthodox style, and promoters stopped referencing his box office magic. Even his old rival Barrera remained more present in the sport, mentoring, commentating, guiding new fighters. Meanwhile, Nas let his story collect dust, and in that void, narratives began to form without him. Some critics labeled him overrated, claiming he relied too heavily on power and never proved himself after his first real loss. Others saw him as a tragic, cautionary tale of arrogance and wasted potential. The truth was more complicated, but because Nas refused to tell it, myths filled the silence. At boxing expos and fan conventions, when his name came up, the reaction was often the same: a sigh, a shake of the head, and the words, "He could have been the greatest." His absence turned what should have been a celebrated legacy into one of sport's most painful what-ifs. Unlike George Foreman, who returned to shock the world in his 40s, or Tyson, who found redemption decades later, Nas never gave fans a second act. He had brilliance, then silence. And in the cruel world of boxing, where memory is short and glory fades fast, that silence became his greatest opponent. Today, at 51 years old, Prince Naseem Hamed is a man almost unrecognizable from the superstar who once danced into arenas and flipped over the ropes with a grin. The body that once seemed built for speed and chaos is gone, replaced by a heavier frame that struggles under the weight of time and indulgence. Paparazzi sightings over the last decade have shocked fans who grew up watching him at his peak. The lean, featherweight phenom has become a man many barely recognize, moving slowly, walking stiffly, looking older than his years. In one public appearance in 2022, gasps filled the venue as he shuffled into the room, his movements labored, his presence subdued. Social media lit up with disbelief. Is that really Prince Naz? I didn't even recognize him. For many, it was like seeing a superhero stripped of his powers. But beneath the weight gain and the silence lies something deeper, an absence of purpose. Unlike fighters who transition into commentary, coaching, or motivational speaking, Naz shut the door completely on boxing. He has no podcast, no autobiography, no gym with his name on the wall. Younger fans confuse him with Amir Khan, or worse, dismiss him as a flashy relic who didn't adapt. Every year that passes without his voice, his story, his perspective, his legend fades further into the shadows. And yet, there are glimpses. Behind closed doors, he supports his sons who have shown interest in boxing, sometimes giving quiet advice, sometimes stepping into the gym just long enough to pass on a tip. Young Yemeni fighters in Britain speak of private words of encouragement, moments where the old fire flickers again. But Naz avoids cameras, avoids headlines, avoids even the chance to explain his silence. Perhaps it is pride. Perhaps it is pain. Perhaps the Barrera loss fractured more than his record. It fractured his spirit. Some close to him whisper that he still hasn't forgiven himself for walking away. Others believe his religious devotion deepened, pulling him away from fame and toward a quieter life of faith. Whatever the truth, the result is the same. The man who once lit up the boxing world has chosen to disappear from it. His health is now a growing concern. Years of inactivity, weight fluctuation, and indulgence have taken their toll. Reports suggest chronic knee pain, fatigue, and mobility issues. Friends say it's a sensitive subject, one he avoids at all costs, but the images speak for themselves. The fighter who once floated on his toes now struggles with each step. The tragedy of Prince Naseem Hamed's story isn't that he lost to Barrera. It isn't even that he went to prison. It's that he never came back. In a sport where redemption is woven into its DNA, he denied himself a second act. George Foreman shocked the world at 45. Tyson returned for exhibitions at 54. Even fighters broken by addiction, scandal, or repeated defeat often find a way back into the conversation. But Naz cut the tape mid-film, leaving his story unfinished, his fans forever asking what might have been. And yet, the final chapter hasn't been written. At 51, he may never fight again, but he doesn't have to. His charisma, his knowledge, his experience could still inspire. He could train fighters, mentor the next generation, tell his side of the story that only he knows. The world is waiting for closure, for the prince to reclaim his crown in some form, not through punches, but through presence. Will he do it? Or will he let silence win forever? That is the haunting question that lingers over his legacy. For now, the prince lives in shadows, his story suspended between brilliance and tragedy. He gave the world unforgettable nights, unforgettable knockouts, unforgettable entrances. But he never gave them a goodbye, and until he does, his name will remain one of boxing's greatest what-ifs, a legend defined not only by what he did in the ring, but by what he left undone outside of it. The fans who once chanted his name still hold out hope, clinging to the possibility that one day Prince Naseem Hamed will return, not to fight, but to speak, to explain, to give the closure he denied them 20 years ago. Until then, his legacy is frozen, a bittersweet memory of brilliance, arrogance, and silence. And perhaps that is the true tragedy. Not the loss, not the prison, not the weight gain, but the choice to disappear and let time erase a king who once ruled the world.